Hello Reg audience, welcome back. We've got a practical Regcast for you today. We're not just going to tell you what you should be doing, we're actually going to tell you how to do it. So, you know, sort of helpful as well as bossy. We're talking about migrating to Windows Server 2012 today. So we hope that you're going to get something out of it, because we know that it's something that a lot of you want to do. There we go. Now, the reason why we're talking about it today is because we really should have had this conversation quite some time ago. You are now at the point where after this Regcast, not during, but after this Regcast, if you go away and start doing it, then you might just get the whole thing finished in time. If you wait too much longer, well, what we're going to find out is you're really going to be in a bit of trouble. But then again, you've done this sort of end-of-life thing before. It's just that Windows Server, well, that throws up a few complicated decisions to make. And we've got the guys in the studio who are going to be helping you to make it through. Let me show you how long you have got. In years to come, people will be saying to you, what were you doing on the 14th of July 2015 when Windows Server went to end of life? And you'll be able to tell them, I was relaxing on the beach because we did all the work, because we saw a Regcast about it and it reminded me to get my project started. Now, before we get going on this, there are a couple of things I need to mention to you. And the first thing is something that I don't normally mention to you, and that is that the guys who've done this Regcast are going to give you something free. So this Regcast was put together by a cast of thousands, well, three really. HP and Intel and Microsoft have all collaborated on bringing together the information that's in this Regcast. They all wanted to be in the studio today, but we wouldn't let them. We don't have enough chairs, to be honest. And so we just got Julius from Microsoft here, but the three of them have also got together, and there is a half-day workshop that you can sign up for that's free. It's going to be in Victoria in central London. June the 26th is the date for that. We are going to give you details of that at the end. So that's going to keep you with us for an hour. There's loads of good stuff in between, but remember that there will be a free workshop for you at the end. The other normal thing that I tell you about, please ask us questions. There are a lot of questions that could be asked about this. Please do ask them, and the guys here will give you good advice. Now, also, there's a lot of information on the slides. You can get hold of the slides. And soon, you might see down at the bottom, I believe it's underneath me, that there are some poll questions. Don't do the poll yet. Don't do it yet. Don't do it yet, not for another couple of minutes. And because we'll explain to you what's in the poll. It's pretty simple, to be honest, but it's good information that will also help us know a little bit about the way that you're working with your Windows Server 2003, for example. So that's everything. Let's get on with it and find out who we have on our Regcast today. So, in the third seat, first time in the studio for you, Julius, welcome, representing basically the whole of the technology business, no pressure.
Oh, well, hi there, everybody. My name is Julius Davis. I'm a data center technology specialist from Microsoft. What does that mean? It's a bit of a mouthful. Well, effectively, it's just a technical pre-sales role in Microsoft. So I spend all my time talking to customers and partners around these sort of problems that we're going to discuss today.
Now, you were telling me just before we came on, Julius, that you sort of present quite a lot. And we didn't get to the end of the story of how you fell off the stage once. Ah,
yeah. So I love to move around. So actually sitting on a chair is a little bit of a strange feeling for myself. But during my wanderings on one session, there turned out to be a 3-foot gap between the stage and the screen behind. Ooh. And so I walked over to the screen, I pointed at the screen, and hey presto, I disappeared.
That's just fantastic. These two chairs are a bit wobbly, to be honest. If you could do something like that, sort of Norman Wisdom-like later on, if the pace flags, then I'll give you a signal.
Love to add that entertainment.
And that's great. Everybody loves that. Everybody loves that. A man who never falls over in a Regcast. How about that? From Freeform Dynamics, the Dark Lord. Hello.
First time for everything, Tim.
We'll see what we can do.
I was happy to go for a flyer. I can do some sort of Jurgen Klinsmann dives. Bring up the World Cup theme.
No, for people watching this on the on-demand, yes, who are sick of football. Now, Tony, there's a lot of stuff in this Regcast, which is pretty much stuff that you bang on about all the time, isn't it?
Indeed.
I say that almost like it sounds like a negative thing, but the good habits that you keep encouraging people to adopt, a lot of this is about those.
It is indeed. And again, it's the feedback that we get from the register audience telling us that this is the sort of information that they require and that they often don't possess, and how to get hold of it. Right. And take things forward one step at a time. Yeah,
now let's have a look for the Windows. Windows Server 2003, end of support. What does it mean? This is a sad time at the beginning of the Regcast. End of support. It's not good news, is it, Julius? So what have we got here?
Well,
lots of no's, yes.
Well, let's just be clear here. July the 14th, 2015.
Yeah.
Now, we're not going to see any more updates for Windows Server 2003. Yeah. Right, we're going to stop and let's...
No patches.
No patches. That's right. It's end of maintenance for that product. And just be aware, you know, in the last year alone, we've had 37 updates for Windows Server 2003, security updates. So, you know, we've taken Windows Server 2003 as far as we can go, right? It's kind of time to move on from us. We can't really patch it anymore. So just be careful about that. Be aware of that. And be aware what it means in terms of compliance and regulatory implications as well. So if you're running services on Windows 2003, for example, that require PCI compliance, you know, you now, with Windows 2003 after that date, it'll be on effectively an unsupported platform.
So it doesn't matter whether it's working or not, you cannot demonstrate compliance.
Exactly, exactly, and that's a big challenge to a lot of our customers. And I guess the other point to bear in mind as well is, remember, there's kind of no safe haven for this either. You can't just virtualize and think, hey presto, I've solved my problem. You're still out of compliance. You know, we're still not shipping patches. And by the way, virtualizing doesn't automatically provide you support either. So you might think you've got a safer place to run, but effectively you're kind of not. You still have the same risk and threat profile.
And the support is also talking about the support for the applications from the ISVs themselves. And clearly, if you're running applications that are really important to the business and suddenly your application, your ISV, is no longer supporting that, then are your business users going to be comfortable running on a platform that's unsupported at the operating system level, but also where the apps are no longer supported, so people will not fix things if they go wrong. And okay, you've probably found them by then, but you know, there's always the chance, you know, Murphy's Law being what it is.
Absolutely, but who's got 2003, Tony? Has it,
almost everybody's got 2003.
Everybody?
Yeah, there's
I can imagine everybody on this Regcast, or else it wouldn't have shown up.
Well, we'll find out the answer to that question in just a few minutes. But it's certainly clear that there's an awful lot of 2003 out there. It's one of those things that server platforms tend to get put in and then left alone until you really have to tweak them. And so people have been creating services running on 2003 now for a very long time. And they're still out there doing life, the universe and everything.
Good. Poll time. That's what we need to do. We need to do a poll now. As you see, we've got 2 questions on the poll today. And so it's going to find out that question. How much Windows, the first one is basically how much Windows Server do you have? And so that'll help us know how widespread it is in your organisation. And the second one is, what are you using it for? What's it still being used for? Now, don't go out and find out exactly. We'll take your best guess at the moment, but please fill in the poll. We'll get the first pass on the results in a few minutes' time. Julius, when you go to organisations, do people know how much Windows Server they've got?
I generally find that most of the customers I speak to they have a reasonable handle, but it really is so varied between my customers. I went to one customer the other day who had a printout on his wall of 653 servers. Right, he knew exactly what the state of play was around his exposure to Windows Server 2003. But I've got many other customers.
That's the exception.
It is. That is absolutely the exception. And I would suggest that for a lot of my customers, if not the majority, there's still pockets of servers out there that they really still don't have a good handle on what they're doing or how they relate to other servers in the organisation.
Totally, this is a problem. This is the long-term problem of people just not knowing what they have, which is understandable though.
Yeah, it comes up time after time because you build an infrastructure and you run it for years and years and years. You know, you can lose track of where things are quite easily. You know, someone knew precisely what that box over there was doing when it was put in, and probably for quite some time afterwards. But eventually, it falls into, you know, it becomes invisible just by being there all the time. And so you lose track of exactly what you're running, where it is, who's using it, if anyone. and how important it is to the business. And that's some of the things we'll be coming to later.
I hope everyone's filling in their surveys on this, but while you're doing it, we've done some reg research on this in the past, and what have we found out?
Well, we found out that there's, a pretty general selection of different workloads that are running on there. Everything from, the ubiquitous Exchange, all of the SharePoint, so the sharing stuff, business applications, whether they are developed in-house or from an ISV, standard file and print services, absolutely ubiquitous, and then a lot of infrastructure management where you've created your DNS servers, your DHCP, all of the stuff that actually keeps everything else running, but again, tends to be pretty invisible.
And people, Julius, people tend to keep this stuff running because these are things that you don't want them breaking. So once you've got it set up, you keep it going.
Absolutely, and we know how difficult it is once once you have these services and applications and servers deployed, people don't want to touch them. But I really think that people need to start thinking about lifecycle management. You can't just deploy something and just forget about it. You really need to start thinking about the life cycle of everything that you deploy into your organisation.
Yeah. Now, on all of these points, Tony, there is also. Does it have to be a terrible ordeal to move any of these functions to a new operating system? Because you cannot afford to have these things down for a week or 2 weeks because you've run into something surprising.
It doesn't have to be an ordeal, but to migrate any of these, to change any of them, takes planning. And planning takes time and effort, people's resources, the stuff that's in really short supply these days.
Okay, now that's it. Yeah. Do we have any survey results yet? Okay, they're just the survey results are just on their way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at just going to have a quick look at our quick wins here, and just Tony, these are the sorts of things that again reg readers are telling us that are the simple things that you can immediately get a benefit from.
Yeah, these are the sorts of things that when we talk to the people who moved on to Server 2012 very early in the cycle, sometimes even before it was GA'd. These are the areas that they told us made really good sense, that they found no problems actually identifying wins that gave them real value back immediately. The virtualization capabilities in Hyper-V 3 was top of the list. Everybody recognised those as being really up there now. High availability, giving people the ability to actually extend the number of applications that they can make more highly available than in the past. The ability to run Linux guests, and again we know from the Register's audience that there's a lot of people out there who really like open source software, so the ability to run that now straight on 2012 on Hyper-V 3 worked fine. The extension of the storage platforms that were supported, and then the whole networking side and making that easier to actually look after. And a couple of points that are not actually on the chart but came through time after time was the ability to actually manage things, and also having capabilities to actually automate a lot of the routine tasks, so that some of the workload that people are doing now, just keeping things running, was lifted off their shoulders so that they could focus on more valuable areas.
Lovely. Do you want to know the results?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
The results are in. The results of the registered jury are. Now, so on question 1, so we have more than 50% 2003 servers. That's about that's 43% of our audience. Gosh. More than 2 out of 5. They got 25 to 49 is another 27%. So you stick that together, 43, 50. So that's so that's more than 2/3. So anyway, that's and so and you can, as you can guess, very few of our audience have no Windows Server 2003. But there's so that that's a big number, isn't it? A big number of servers to migrate. What do you run? Database. 2 out of 3 are running the database applications. Infrastructure, 78%, 4 out of 5. Productivity, half. And ERP or CRM, about a quarter. Custom apps, just over half. So they're
Life, the universe, and everything.
Basically, life, the universe, and everything. Sorts of things you expected, Julius?
Yeah, that is about the right proportion. I do see a lot of infrastructure services, file print, DHCP Active Directory services on 2003. I also see that customers with ERP and critical applications, they tend to be very focused on maintaining those applications and moving those applications forward to newer versions. So I can understand why there's a kind of maybe a lower penetration of those apps on 2003 2003, but they still are there though from that report.
Yeah. Tony, your thoughts?
Yeah, again, it's a pretty broad spread. So everything from the applications that the business users are really using to the invisible stuff that everybody depends on that's just not seen.
Yeah. Now, if you haven't voted, keep voting. We're going to update the results at the end of the show. Well, we might update them. It depends if they get more interesting. And but they'll be better. Yeah, and so, you know, but we will. So, you know, if you haven't voted, yeah, go on, vote. And if there is anything about that or any particular aspect of that that you want to comment on that the survey has, you know, brought up in your mind, please let us know. I mean, by asking a question, it doesn't have to have a question mark at the end of it. We'll take comments as well. We're good that way. Now, good. So let's have a look. First of all, there's one thing that comes into this, and we very often easily talk about this refresh as, oh, it's a good time to do a hardware refresh as well when you're upgrading your operating system. So we'll have a look at that like a little bit, and to let us know. This is kind of like the Intel portion of the show, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And I think it's really important that people understand that as they go along this journey of kind of transforming their data center, what we see is a close alignment with refreshes and new technologies in the data center, both server platforms, networking and storage platforms.
If you're going to have a difficult week, you might as well have it for two reasons.
Well, you might as well get yourself positioned ready for the future as
That's
well.
Another way to put it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what have we got to see? So looking at the consolidation statistics here, what does this slide mean, Julius?
Well, what it's really telling us is that if you look at a modern server that you buy today and comparing it with you know, an Intel server from about 5 years ago, we're seeing about 7 times the power in a server. So really that opens the doors to some fantastic consolidation opportunities, and especially with the adoption of technologies like virtualization, it kind of makes sense to make sure that when you're putting more eggs in one basket, you're putting it on a modern server platform that enables you to scale and has the availability and reliability for you to have trust in putting more eggs in that one basket. Mm-hmm. And of course there are ancillary benefits as well. Heat, power savings, and for those who are concerned about reducing carbon emissions as well, these servers are effectively so more efficient than servers from 5 years ago.
And again, it's a way of making a business case to do the upgrade, assuming that, you know, we have to do it isn't enough, because quite often business people would think, well, do we really need to change? It's an opportunity to actually say, well, frankly, if we've got some old server kit out there, and we know from the register audience that there is a lot of old server kit out there, it's another way of actually saying, hey, we can actually part fund this change just on the numbers that come up in terms of doing consolidation, and that's something that the register audience is very familiar with.
Now let's just have a look at this as well. So I'm having trouble with my clicker today. So yeah, looking at supporting virtualization, this is the sort of side benefits of virtualization as well, is it?
Well, it is, and I think many of our customers initially were a little bit worried about virtualization as a vehicle to consolidate, because they tended to think that, you know, workloads would run slower if you virtualized it. But actually, if you look at kind of the modern server platform, you look at things like the scalability of Hyper-V, you can run workloads in VMs now with 64 processors, 1 terabyte of memory. You've even got server platforms now where you can install up to 6 terabytes of memory on a single server platform. Now, I know many customers won't have pockets deep enough to deploy that, you know, as a general server platform in the data center, but it gives you the opportunity to scale up and to improve your server consolidation ratios.
Now, does this necessarily require an upgrade to 2012?
To really, and this sounds a bit of a marketing term,
unleash I can see where this one's going, yeah.
The fact is that there's a lot of new technologies coming in servers. So, for example, we're seeing changes to networking in the data center. We see reference here to VMDQ support. I mean, what's that about? Is that just acronym hell? Well, actually, if you're consolidating lots of VMs on a single server, if you're moving to 10 gig networks in the data center, you really need to make sure you've got modern networking and server platforms so that your VMs can pump data at those rates through that server. And without a modern server platform and a modern operating system, you're going to be introducing bottlenecks, which means you're not getting the best out of that platform.
Tony, do you favour hardware, software at the same time?
We know that the audience, there's quite a tight correlation between the two, because again, it makes a lot of sense in many ways. You're planning a reasonably big project for one thing, doing the hardware and refresh at the same time makes a lot of sense. The other thing with looking at this particular chart is we mentioned earlier extending the high availability to new platforms. In the past, if your server 2003 hardware failed, then you might have lost one application and annoyed one set of users, whereas if you've consolidated many different applications onto a single device, then the ability to actually isolate errors and problems as they occur without affecting everybody else on the same server is really important, because the last thing you want is something going wrong in one application or one piece of the hardware. With these really big servers now, just one of your CPUs having an issue, the I/O somewhere, a disk, whatever. You need to be able to isolate things well so that everybody else can carry on working while that problem is automatically looked after.
Now, this is the sort of thing that we get, that you end up with, Julius. Is that the sort of density that we can get? Yeah,
and if you look at kind of the density that we're achieving today on a modern platform, we're seeing improvements of 2 to 3 times compared to 4 or 5 years ago, just based on that server platform. But there are other changing technologies in the data center, like we see the adoption of SSD as a storage platform, and we also see modern converged networking as well, the move to 10 gig networking, and all of these kind of take away bottlenecks and allow you to effectively improve your consolidation ratios. So I used to see customers virtualize at about 5 to 10 virtual machines per server, roughly on average, 4 or 5 years ago, and now I see customers easily pushing 40 to 50 virtual machines, and in some cases even higher than that. And it's really these new platforms, new technologies that enable you to do that.
Plus the management software that's wrapped around everything, not just within the server and the chipsets themselves, but lifting up to the operating system level, the application level, that let you actually look after really big numbers of people, big numbers of services using just the same number of admins out there.
Do you want to try a techie question, Julius?
Oh, try me.
I see. I got one from Chris. Actually, the thrust of it, it's techie in its detail, but the thrust of it is quite an important one. That his organisations, they're going to server 2008 release 2. That's where they're going. The fundamental reason is the NTLM constraints around moving the domains up a level. So he's basically asking, can you suggest some way that he can argue that this is a bad idea? Going to 2000, yeah. Why? Yeah.
I'm not aware of that constraint, I have to say.
If the constraint's a bad thing, now there'll be a lot of people in 2003 that might be thinking, I'm not going to go all the way to 2012, because there are some problems getting directly there, aren't there?
There are for some workloads, yes, but for Active Directory, I think we can run 2012 actually in the same domain as 2003. So
your message is take another look. That's what it is.
Have a closer look at that. Now there may be some security policies that the organisation has decided to implement that might restrict some of your choices, but the technology platform itself, I don't think, is putting that.
Now the bigger question I'm saying about this, really, I guess, is there isn't necessarily a reason to do a 2008 sort of intermediate upgrade if you want to get away from 2003 at the moment.
No, I don't.
You can't find. I'm just trying to think if there was a case where you would say that's the best idea.
I can't think of a case where I'd kind of I'd see that recommendation. All the customers I'm speaking to are very much focusing on 2012 and 2012 R2 as a platform.
Yeah.
The only potential reason I could think of would be if you had an ISV or an application that hadn't been rewritten for 2012 but had been rewritten for 2008. Yeah. And if that's the case, then why is your ISV not going to 2012? Do they still exist? If they don't, then you might want to consider end of life anyway.
What we need to do is talk about the migration process, because there's the we talk about this to a hardware and software refresh together and everything like that, but that's a lot of work and it needs to be managed properly, doesn't it?
Well, I think that the most important thing is kind of, especially at this point in time, is maybe try to take a step back from some of the individual details that undoubtedly you'll need to cover at some point in the migration process, and think about the process of migration that you're going to be undergoing. So it's about having discipline around the approach. And what we find is kind of this four-step approach works really well for our customers. And the 4 steps include basically discovery of your existing environment. We'll cover these in more detail. An assessment of the workloads that you have, a targeting of where those workloads could actually move towards, because as we go through this, you'll see there are a number of options on the table. And then finally, the last thing is the step of actually doing the migration.
So this is basically what we're going to be doing for we talk about for the next half hour, isn't it? I mean, this is the whole thing. Yeah. But this covers quite a lot. I'm always nagging for people to say, can we get some practical advice here? Well, we've got half an hour of it, and it's going to be, hopefully, it's going to be quite useful for them. So yeah,
Charles, I could almost have written myself.
Yes, this is very much what you do. You know how you normally
it's about
set
the
up
basics.
the problem.
Find out what you have.
Yeah.
Put it into different buckets that are based on the priority to the business, the different types of application, the users, etc., and work out, how to move forwards. But these are things that you really do have to take that step back first and find the time to do. Okay. Because without it, everything else is going to be guesswork.
Yeah. Now let's have a look. First of all, the discovery. Clicker's working like a dream. That's just about people running around fixing it. It's really fantastic. Now, okay. So first of all, we're on the process of discovery and cataloging. Microsoft tools to do this?
Yeah, we do provide some free tools. It's always a good word to use, isn't it? So
the Microsoft,
we call it the MAP tool. It's the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit. And it's a free tool set downloadable from Microsoft.com that allows you to discover and inventory servers in your environment. And it'll do a good job and a basic job of kind of helping you to discover and understand where you have Windows Server 2003 in your estate.
But there's going to be not free tools that will do a proper better job.
There are as well.
Yeah, and so we've got some of those. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the tools are available, I think.
They are, but there's a lot of value to be gained in this approach by helping you better understand what services and applications you have deployed, and also the relationships between services and applications. So some of these other tool sets will actually discover which servers are talking to which servers, which other servers, as part of an application. Yeah. So it allows you to stitch together a service map of the applications within your data center, within your environment.
Tony, you always say people don't know what they got.
It's the case. When I was a CIO, when I was an IT manager, I really had to struggle to keep up with what it was, and that was just a moderately sized environment. As things get bigger and bigger and more complicated, it's really difficult to keep track. Yeah. So actually understanding what you have and that interrelationships between them, which these days is becoming even more complex, is really important because, as we said, a lot of these servers might have been out there running for a long time, and so quite what's linked to them, which other business applications might be feeding off them, might not be in people's heads anymore. Maybe the people who set it up originally are no longer even in the company. So getting that clear picture is really important. Without that, as I say, everything else, you could be opening yourselves up to potential service downtime. I
suppose even if you think that you don't have very much exposure at all, then running this is still an essential step, isn't it? Because you don't want an unpleasant surprise.
It's a bit like Julian's earlier statement when he said he's got a customer that knew exactly how many servers they had. I've been into people who tell me they know exactly how many servers they had, and then when they actually went out and did a real-time audit, they discovered that actually they had a really good idea of how many servers they had when they did the audit the first time, but that was 3 years ago. So now it's a completely different number.
Yeah. Now this doesn't have to be a long process either, does it?
It doesn't. It doesn't. So the tool sets can generally be run over, your own specified period of time. We like to kind of run them for a reasonable time in order to gather some of the rhythms of the business. So you may even be able to gather, for example, and find out who's logging onto these servers. You might find you have application servers or deployed, and nobody's actually using them. So yeah, we're not saying you have to run these tools for 3
Doesn't have to be bad news. You might find out that your exposure is not necessarily.
And it's also not like 5 or 10 years ago when using these tools could have put quite a lot of stress on the servers actually running them and the network. Things have moved on a long, long way since then. Now you can actually run this stuff, in pretty much close to real time.
Now you're talking about categorising these things, Julius. There's 3 dimensions here. Why do we need 3?
Well, because it's really important to kind of, I guess, try to construct a view of which are the applications that you need to focus on first. So you might end up after this discovery phase of several hundred applications, but given we have 392 days before the end of life, you really want to focus on those applications that are most important to you, that are most critical to you, and you want to make sure you bring the right amount of resource to bear up front for those applications that are complex. So we have kind of 3 pivots here, and the 3 pivots are really about application type. So what type is the application? You know, is it a Microsoft application? Is it a server role? So we heard on the poll, there's a lot of infrastructure servers already deployed out there, so let's get a good handle on what those server roles are. And then of course there's the custom applications, the applications you've written, and the third-party applications. So understanding the lay of the land with regards to those application types will allow you to put them in buckets. But we also need to understand other things like criticality. How important are these applications? We don't want you spending time and money in trying to remediate an application or service if only a handful of people in your organisation are using it. We really want you to focus on the important applications. And then finally, the complexity. Because we have everything from a single application running on a single server to multi-tier applications running ERP services that are clearly a different degree of complexity and will take a different approach in order to migrate those.
So even if something is marginal but it's very complex, you'd still want to start early if you're going to retain it. Because the fact that it's marginal doesn't mean you can leave it till the last, because you won't get there in time.
Exactly. It's all about really understanding what the real impact of those applications are to your business and allowing you to prioritise where you make that investment of remediation first.
So the top layer here, you can do pretty automatically. The second layer, that's the bit where you've got to get some time and input, probably from your business users, to work out.
Everyone's going to say mission critical.
Yeah, which is why you need to get them all together and someone with a big stick to actually make some decisions on which ones are really mission critical and which ones are not. And then the last point is that once you've got all this information together, it might actually be another opportunity for saving some money. Because if you're running an application that's got the 3 users using it, but you've got basically a similar application doing the same functionality that everybody else in the company is using, why are these 3 people using a different app?
It becomes time to have that difficult discussion.
Is there a really good reason for that? If there is, great. If not, then why not get rid of that application? Stop paying maintenance on it. You might have acquired it a long time ago, but the likelihood is you're probably still paying maintenance and support. So, opportunity to consolidate the applications, not just the hardware side of things.
Because there's a lot, moving on now, there's a lot in what we're talking about today, which is basically use this as an opportunity, not to carry on thinking in the same way, but just with a new release of the server operating system, but to start making some decisions that you're going to need for your future.
Absolutely, and what we find is customers who go through this process, they actually end up having a better understanding on how to manage the life cycle of these services that they deploy. They're transforming the way they're approaching delivering IT services, and that might sound a bit of a marketing message, but the reality is we really need to move away from thinking of an application or a service as something that you deploy and forget. Everything has a lifetime and a life cycle.
Can I give some good news?
Yes.
We've resolved the NTLM question.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I know. Someone's looked it up on TechNet. Ben's looked it up on TechNet. Good man, Ben. And there are no changes in functionality for NTLM for Windows Server 2012. There is no removed or deprecated functionality for NTLM for Windows Server 2012. So it sounds like you can go to Windows Server 2012. Go there. Yeah, 2008.
TechNet's a fantastic resource, by the way.
Well, it helps. It's helped us out. There we go. Now, so, yeah.
Shame it's ended. Yes.
And a quick one, just for Marta, whilst we're at our natural pause, Marta said, "What happens if you haven't got the money for the hardware refresh?"
So hardware refresh is not a requirement for doing this migration. It's just one of the options that you might decide to do. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't go through this consolidation and migration exercise on existing technology that you have in your environment. You can also look at other technologies like cloud-based technologies, for example, as a potential target for this migration
Which is where
exercise.
we're going with this, isn't
Absolutely.
it? But Tony, you could also maybe, if you're talking about retiring applications and things like that, there is a cost-saving angle to this as well.
There is. It's all about making the business case. maybe you could make the cost benefits of acquiring new hardware based on, the power savings and things that were touched on in the earlier slide. Maybe you can do that on the service rationalization, so the application rationalization side. So there's lots of potential in there, but as you say, updating to Server 2012 isn't mandatory to change the hardware. It just happens that lots of people do the same together. Lots of the register audience do that, so you don't need to. If your hardware is good enough to still run in the new environment, go ahead. Of course, you've then got the question of how you actually do the upgrade cycle without losing service, but that's, again, just one of the things that the guys and girls out there have to look at.
It's just one of the things. Just a quick question, a clarification from Martin. Are we talking about Windows Server 2012 or R2?
We're talking about both, actually.
Yeah.
From a lifecycle perspective.
For people who don't know the difference.
Windows Server 2012 was like a big step change in technology. We released about September 2012. And then Windows Server 2012 R2 was a minor release to that server platform that came about a year later. So there's incremental feature improvements in 2012 R2. Things like Hyper-V, for example, just gets easier, faster and better. But fundamentally, if you're looking at that shift, that change of platform from 2003, whether it's 2012 or 2012 R2, it's effectively the same process that you go through from a migration phase.
Let's have a look at how we make some of these choices then. Windows Server, first of all.
So, as we found in the poll, there are many servers deployed running Windows Server kind of infrastructure roles, and we have a choice here. So when we're migrating from Windows Server 2003, a server role like a file server, for example, or potentially a web server, or even a domain controller, we've got choice as to where we're going to target that. Are we going to target the 2012 R2 platform on a physical server? So are there reasons why the infrastructure service that you're running has a requirement to run in a physical infrastructure? Maybe you haven't adopted virtualization yet. Maybe you're not ready to adopt virtualization, so physical environment is most appropriate. But we're seeing great take-up of virtualization. It's seen for most of my customers as the default platform, but it's not the only target. So we also have, for example, cloud services like Microsoft Azure and its infrastructure as a service capability, allowing you to effectively virtualize those servers, migrate them, and actually run them in the cloud on a pay-as-you-go type model. So you only pay when they're running and you don't pay when they're powered off. For some of our customers, that's a very attractive proposition. And then for some other workloads, and here, for example, on the slide, we're actually, it might not come across on the webcast, but we're highlighting the web server here. There are other options as well. So, for example, like the Windows Azure website service, which is a multi-tenant hosted website service. So for this type of migration, we're talking about taking a web service and moving it to a PaaS platform, a platform as a service type platform in the cloud. So you can see there's a number of options here.
And there is actually, we did some regcasts in the last year with QA, where they actually went through the process of doing some of this.
Yes.
Of moving it. And what comes across in that, I encourage people to look at them, just not yet. And what comes across in that is the power of what you can do from an infrastructure point of view.
Absolutely.
And being if you do want to be flexible about this.
Absolutely. And just the final thing to say here is, especially with the infrastructure roles, just check on the online TechNet library, because Microsoft provides many migration tools to help you migrate Windows 2003 infrastructure roles like file servers, DHCP servers, to Windows 2012 and 2012 R2. So we actually do provide tool sets to help you.
Right, let's have a look. Microsoft apps next.
So Microsoft applications, I've kind of pulled these out because as a separate element here, because Microsoft applications will have their own requirements around operating system requirements. So take, for example, SharePoint. If you're running SharePoint or the old Windows SharePoint services on Windows Server 2003, there's no option to take that Windows Server SharePoint Services 2003 and kind of move it and run it natively on Windows 2012. That is not an option. So for these types of applications, you need to look at migration to an appropriate new application platform.
Yeah, okay. But that new migration platform might not necessarily, again, be on-premise.
It might not be on-premise. You have a choice. Again, it's the same sort of thought process. Does it go physical, a virtual machine on-premise, infrastructure as a service? Or we see a lot of customers for some of these workloads, especially around SharePoint, looking at SaaS solutions like Office 365 as a target.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be new hardware. It could also be your existing hardware platform.
Yeah, and if you've done your categorization correctly, you'll know exactly what you can achieve and what you can't. Third-party apps, now this is a big game, isn't it, the third-party apps?
Well, it is, yes, and we divided them into kind of two types. One is kind of custom applications.
Yeah.
Custom applications are effectively homegrown applications, and those are applications that you may have written, so you may have developers in your organisation.
Well, more than half of the audience today has. Yeah.
Exactly. And third-party applications are effectively what I sometimes refer to as COTS, or off-the-shelf applications that you've bought. And again, it's thinking about that process of where you want to target them. So are you going to target those applications on a 2012 platform, on new hardware, in virtual, in a cloud-based solution like Windows Azure, or even is there an opportunity to retire that application and look at a SaaS-based application delivery model instead? So again, the thought processes are very similar about trying to put structure about where these applications should end up.
And again, once you've got the catalogue of the services and apps that you are running, then you can go and talk to your ISV, if you've got an ISV app, or your own developers, or if you contracted someone to develop it. How do we move forward so that you can get the big picture before you start?
We had Sky in the studio once talking about doing this with their applications. Yeah, and and I remember they said it was a very big, quite painful job. But when they had the full list, when they had the full knowledge of all the applications that they were supporting, then they realised just how essential a job it was. They turned out in. They seem to be doing okay.
It's one of those things that you generate applications all the time, and until you've got some processes wrapped around application lifecycle management, they tend to exist forever until someone makes a decision to kill them. And that's something that you don't often get too many routine opportunities for, because it's not something we've really looked at in the past, but we should be doing so now.
Now this one, Julie, she's saying to me, is like, it's not about, because we're talking about the destination here.
Yes.
So really, we've talked about outcomes first of all, but there has to be a process to get.
There has to be a journey.
Yes.
So how do you move from the existing position to the new position? And this is where, again, there's not one solution or one path that you take. There's a number of different paths. So what we say here in this slide is effectively there's a number of different options. So for example, you may already have an application that you can migrate as is. So we've already heard about some of the infrastructure roles, for example, where we can migrate those roles as is from 2003 to 2012. Again, looking at your application portfolio, both Microsoft, third-party and custom, you will identify some applications in there that will run and will be supported on Windows 2012 and 2012 R2, in which case migration as is kind of makes sense for those. But you'll also find other applications where you just can't do that. You might need to increment the version another level, and we see this very commonly as well. So
you've got to roll that into your budget then if there's going to be upgrades involved.
Absolutely. So you need to factor that in, but you need to understand which applications out of your portfolio are going to fall into that bucket.
And there's also a good chance that the ISVs themselves will start encouraging you to upgrade anyway, because they don't want to be supporting a platform that's no longer part of the mainstream infrastructure ecosystem.
Yes.
And for those custom applications that you've written yourself, you may even have the opportunity to refactor, rewrite, or kind of shim them to run on Windows Server 2012. We often find it's very small little changes that are needed to make those run on 2012. And then finally, there's not quite finally, we also have an interesting opportunity for you to use third-party tool sets to actually take a running application on Windows 2003 and effectively do something very similar to a live migrate of that application onto the new platform. And we run it kind of in a virtualized environment so that even if it won't run on 2012, these technologies will enable that application to think that it's running on Windows Server 2003. So for those really tricky, challenging applications, there are even tool sets out there that can help customers do that.
Do you recommend the virtualizing, shimming approach, Tony?
Again, it depends on what's your workload. So I couldn't say definitely do that for everything because that's the wrong answer. It's a question of find out what you've got in the first place. And then look at all the options. For some, it will be a really good choice. For others, maybe not.
It strikes me as something that you would only do as a last resort.
Yes, I tend to feel that it's probably something that will drop out as a last resort if you really need to do that. And let's not forget as well that for some of our customers, this migration opportunity will also surface different versions of applications, and you may decide to rationalize your application portfolio to retire certain applications and standardize on newer applications. So hence the find an alternative application.
That could involve some internal politics though.
Yes.
Because getting people to agree that their application really isn't needed anymore can be tricky, which is why that version of last resort might be something you have to do just because some people don't want to move. And as long as they've got enough budget and clout within the organisation to keep it that way,
you have to live with that.
Then you've got to live with it.
Yeah. Now, I'm always saying, what would the spreadsheet look like if you planned this? So you've done a spreadsheet for me.
I have, yeah. And really what we've been leading up to is kind of the discipline associated with being able to collate all this information together to allow you to build that portfolio of applications and services, to identify the criticality, the importance of those apps, to identify who the owner is, and also identify what the target migration paths are and what the migration journeys available to those applications are as well. So it's really bringing together all the work that's been done into one place, so it allows you to focus on those critical and important applications.
And allows you to create a critical path to get to the 14th of July next year.
Absolutely.
In good shape, because what falls out of this is some things you really need to get on with now.
Yes, absolutely.
It also gives you the opportunity to really try and convince some of those business owners about the importance and put it into a context that they can relate to. To give them basically a visual handle on it.
Can you start?
Are you willing to take the
money
risk
to
on
this, Tony?
Depends again on what the application is, but you can certainly get it in people's heads that it's going out of support. Can the business actually work with that? If it's one of these compliance-driven applications, then the answer is almost certainly no. You've got the budget holder, or at least the person responsible for it, for them to actually take some responsibility for a change, instead of always wanting ownership without responsibility, so that they can make decisions.
Some will be risk-free, at which point, let's get on with it now. Exactly. Other stuff, then you can take a more nuanced approach to it.
Absolutely. And I will say that, again, take a step back from, you're trying to do a little bit more than just get rid of Windows 2003. You're actually trying to put your organisation in a great place for understanding your services, managing that life cycle. And as an example, for example, and I worked with a customer recently who had, I think he had about 27,000 servers in his organisation. And going through this process, they actually identified that there was 9,000 servers running applications that they could retire. So that's an incredible amount of savings associated with going through this process. So they turned this from being a problem I've got to solve into an opportunity.
Not everyone's going to get there, but if that happens, imagine all the love they gave those servers. That was completely
You've also
wasted.
got the thing here that tells you not to try and boil the ocean. Because you can't boil the ocean. One thing you might want to do though is on some of those lower risk, lower priority things, is use those as your sort of practical test move forwards first before you try the more complex stuff. Again, it depends on quite what your spread of work's going to be.
So now let's just have, there seems to be a moral in the migration slide here. Test, test and test.
Absolutely. I mean, the choice that our customers face are really go on this journey themselves. or really try to leverage the experience of others to help them on the journey. So I have customers taking both approaches, but the key mantra to this is the testing cycle. It's really prioritising what you need to test as well. So it's getting really focused on the important workloads.
No, we're planning this. We're talking about to the guys from HP. We're talking about, because they have a migration services.
They absolutely do. They have a fantastic migration service, and
you can't really read that at the moment. I would recommend downloading if you want to read about the HP migration service.
Absolutely, yeah. And it comes in kind of bite-sized chunks as well. So you it's not an all or nothing approach, and it allows you to either you can either purchase this as a separate offering or combine it into an existing kind of HP engagement that you have. But it isn't just about doing the migration. They'll also do things like create a business case for you and help maybe justify some of this investment that you have to make along this process.
But, I mean, the moral of the story is you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do this testing and this migration in an organised way.
Absolutely.
You might have, because now we've been through some big migrations recently in the last few years. We've done regcasts on them. So there might be some resources internally, but this is a particularly important one, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, some of my customers have been through this process before with NT4 and with Windows 2000, and so they kind of know how to crank the handle, but I have a lot of customers who don't. So
the interesting point now is that there's a lot of those hidden infrastructure services in there that if you don't test those properly, then things can go wrong for everybody, not just the ones that are migrating off of 2003 onto 2012.
If you're haphazard, it's not going to uncover those.
You've basically got to test it. It's always the case in IT. You've got to test.
We've got updated graphs, by the way, for our survey. Do you want to have a look for our
okay.
poll? Yeah. So we're going to do. We're showing us people said now the results are it's more or less the same. So it's changed a little bit. So it's 39% have more than 50% 2003, where are we? That's 50. Yes, 39%. 25 to 49% is 27%. Is about a quarter of the audience that are there. And on question 2, then it's about 2/3 on the database. Infrastructure still more than 3/4. Infrastructure is the big one on this. Productivity about half. ERP about a quarter, custom apps just over half. So,
and these are all important services. These are all reasonably business important. You've got to keep them running.
So finally, Tony, we're going to wind up with some of the work that you've been doing, talking to the reg readers with some advice. And there's more of this than we can actually go into in detail. So if you do download the deck, then you can read what they had to say. Yeah,
basically, we just talked to a whole bunch of people that were actually very early adopters of 2012. So not the R2 version. These were almost pre-GA done. To ask people, is it really ready for live use? And even before it was GA, you can see, absolutely. We know that you can roll it out, because even the RDP version that we were using for 10 months stayed up and working. So everybody is quite happy that Server 2012 is fit for production. There's no arguments about that. So it's not like in the old days where when a new server operating system came out, you always waited for SP1 at the very least, if not SP2, 3 or 4 before you migrated. Everyone's quite happy that this stuff is ready for the road.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a relief, isn't it? For you to get that. Hyper-V 3, that seems to get some.
Hyper-V 3 got a lot of approval. The functionality in there came across as being really positive. Everybody was very happy that the capabilities it had meant that it was, ready for mainstream production usage. But just again, to look at the whole stability side of, 2012, is it stable? Yep. As you can see, even the really early software haven't had a support ticket in 3 months.
App compatibility,
App compatibility is, of course, the biggie. Because you've got to get those applications supported on the new platform. And basically everyone says you've got to go out and check, do the things that we've talked about earlier here. Make sure that you know what you've got. Make sure that you know how you can move forwards with it, because you can't just take a 2003 app and stick it on 2012 and hope it's going to work. Yeah.
Now, it's not all great news. I mean, it's mostly good news, isn't it? But there are some warnings on these.
Yeah, but they're not so much warnings. These are just the challenges that people threw up from moving to 2012. And frankly, the first one about licensing crops up all the time. What's the best licensing model for me to use?
We haven't had a licensing question today. I think this is the first time ever. But yeah,
I'm not complaining. But it's quite interesting because we did change the licensing model with 2012. And,
explain.
Explain. Well, actually, I kind of feel confident in saying we simplified the licensing model for Windows Server. So effectively, there are two licenses that our customers have a choice between. One is Standard Edition, and the other one is Data Center Edition. Technically, they're identical. From a features, scalability, they're identical. The only difference is virtualization usage rights. So the way I position it is this. If you're building physical servers with a physical workload, then Windows Server 2012 Standard Edition is going to be, the edition we'd recommend. If you're building or licensing in a virtualized environment, whether Hyper-V or VMware, then we'd recommend using Data Center Edition because it comes with unlimited virtualization rights. So you can license a physical server once and you can run an unlimited number of virtual machines running Windows Server on that licensed hardware. So great opportunity to consolidate and save money.
The second point that came out here about automation and people really liking the automation capabilities, especially PowerShell, really came through. But the other thing that came out was that people said, yep, it is a different, administrator interface. So you do need some training to get familiar with it. It's not one of those things that if you just dive in, you can probably work it out. But if you really want to exploit it as effectively as possible, make sure that, as well as test, someone doesn't slash the training budget completely as well, to make sure that you can really use this as quickly as possible and do some of the more sophisticated elements on the management side that have come in here, especially around some of the things around infrastructure administration that give you a lot more flexibility on running, the DNS, the DHCP, etc., in ways that you couldn't do in earlier generations.
If you want to remember, we've got the workshop for that. If you want to catch up on some of that stuff as well, I'm sure that will be covered. You have to cover it now. I've just said you will on the 26th of June. We'll give you the link for that in a minute. Yeah.
The one thing I just wanted to add is don't forget the free training resources that are available as well. So there's a tremendous amount of free training on the Microsoft Virtual Academy. So it allows you to get up to speed. And there's even hands-on labs. You can spin up virtual machines in the cloud and play with this technology as well.
But the training takes time, so make sure that that's allocated in there. It's a training budget. It may not be a cash training budget, but it's your time training budget. And then, as it said, make sure that it's slightly different, so make sure you know it. Get to learn things. As you can see, the second quote here, embrace Server Manager. You'll love it. Again, slightly different maybe to what people are used to in the past, but again, once you're familiar with it, you can really begin to take it. The last point, there was one that we touched on earlier, don't try and do a big bang, prioritize the areas that you want to exploit first. And that applies just as much on the management side as everywhere else, because there's a big increase here looking at System Center 2012 as well, combined with this. And that was something that came out from the research, that combining the new management software with the server platform itself, they really do go together well, and that was appreciated by everybody out there.
So basically, you move in this organised way, but also explore the features in an organised way as well.
Try to leverage the stuff benefits. There's a ton of new stuff.
Again, that's going to help. Not do like for like, but learn the new stuff.
A couple of minutes on the show. I can finally show people where the link is to sign up for the workshop. If you want to sign up for the workshop, oh, that's a relief, isn't it? So I teased you with that. That's where is that? That's down
bottom left.
Yeah, yes, down on the bottom left. There we are. We've got a short link for that. So please do that. It's a quick question from Johnny here. He's going to perform an internal domain migration at the same time as performing this upgrade. Something you would recommend?
I would try to kind of keep major changes one at a time and serial. Try not to do too many things at the same time. So make sure you've got a good handle on your domain migration, and that's probably domain consolidation, and then that will put you in a better kind of position for doing an upgrade to 2012.
Otherwise, your testing again just goes up a level that you need to do to make sure that you're really certain things are going to go well.
Yeah, and it moves everything to level 3 of risk, doesn't it? Once you've got that,
Just try not to spin too many plates at the same time.
Okay, so we've got about half a minute left. Then, in that case, we've got one thing to recommend for people if you're going to do this. You go first, Julius.
I'm going to recommend that you take a step back from thinking about kind of the detail of how and think about the big picture and the process. To me, that is critical to being successful. It's your approach.
You get a good detailed spreadsheet by thinking about the big picture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tony?
It's the basics. Find out what you've got and then get some idea of where you could get to, not just that like-for-like change. What's the opportunity here?
Okay, so that's great. So we've got to think big, but also take care of the detail. We've thank you for all your questions. We've reached the end of our hour. Please let us know what you thought of that. And also let us know if you'd like to hear more about this in the future. But for now, from the Reg, goodbye.